Most of us have a need to be seen, to be represented in the world around us. We want to find others like us, to know we aren't alone or forgotten. We want to know that when someone says, "this is what is," we're a part of that. Commonly, the people who say labels don't matter are those that already see themselves represented in the media, in our workplaces, and in the forms and surveys that populate datasets. For those of us who don't see ourselves everywhere, labels matter. I'm Gaelan Smith, and some of my labels are tall, he, him, US born, urban dweller, small town raised, sibling, trans, queer, and data analysis and visualization engineer at Cleary Gottlieb, a law firm in New York City, as well as freelance datavizer and graphic designer. Welcome to a discussion about why labels matter. Far too many people are not seen because of the labels we're using. The choices we make as we visualize data impact who is seen and who isn't. The labels we use matter in the data as it is designed and collected, in our visualizations as we present it, and for the way our work is received, interpreted, and built on. There's so many ways we define ourselves. How many categories can we put a single person in? I recently sent out an informal survey with as many categories as I could think of, most of which were things a person has little or no direct control over. We'll come back to that distinction in a bit. There was no multiple choice, only free text fields. Some had prompts or examples, some didn't. The answers were astounding. I'm going to ask you to more or less take the survey now. Get out the Notes app on your phone or open a Word doc or, heck, grab a pen and actual paper and take the next 60 seconds to write down every single category you can think of about yourself. I'm going to put the categories I included in the survey on the screen, but come up with others. What is your career and income level? How do you process information? What is your reading fluency? Were you raised in a substantially different lifestyle than you lead now? Whatever comes to mind, write it all down. How'd that go? I bet some of you wrote multiple answers for some categories. That's really common and not often captured in either data collection or our visualizations. I also bet your definitions and categorizations varied broadly. In my survey, which, remember, was entirely free text fields, of the people who listed something like mid-level for career and a number for income level, the range was mid-$30,000 to $160,000. Out of the 91 responses at the time I recorded this, there were 19 different responses for gender, once lightly cleaned. 12 responses were more than one gender. For sexuality, there were 27 unique-ish responses, with 16 of those listing more than one sexuality. What I found even more important, though, were the categories people added. I'd set out to include as many categories as possible that people had little control over, and I still missed some key ones. Social interaction, introvert, extrovert, ambivert. Mental health. Trauma survivor. Allergies, which arguably could be included in the physical traits. I tried to make the box as big as I could, and it still wasn't big enough. Far too often, people don't even think about making the box big enough, sometimes quite literally. My colleague told me about her 6-year-old's assignment from school to create a passport about where he's from. It was a single page to share things like food, clothes, cultural activities, etc. There was one tiny box for "Where is your family from?" This 6-year-old child brings the form home and says, "Mama, what am I supposed to write?" Between his two parents, he is from 6 countries, all of them important, all of them matter. How did it feel to him to be told he had to compress his whole family into one tiny box? My colleague was having none of that and broke that visualization literally to pieces. She made 6 copies of the passport page and filled out every single one, then taped them together. "That's where you're from," she said. Our design choices must make room for everyone. Most of us know by now to test for color blindness. Why? Because why would you leave out 8% of your audience? Are you also testing to make sure your design can be read by a screen reader? Can it be zoomed in? Are the fonts dyslexia friendly? Can someone with a limited attention span grasp the main meaning of your concept? If you're creating a physical thing, can people with varying body configurations and sensory inputs access it? We must also be aware of the invisible design choices, many of which are made for us. As I was preparing for this presentation, I mentioned to RJ Andrews from Info We Trust that I sincerely hope people aren't designing with pink for girls and blue for boys, how that's a recent but pervasive representation and fraught for so many reasons. He agreed with me, and then brought up the red and blue colors for US political parties. My eyes popped open. It hadn't occurred to me to talk about that. It hadn't occurred to me to question that. Why do we use red and blue? What would it mean to use something different? What haven't you questioned? Are you unintentionally reinforcing stereotypes or relying on trite, overused connotations? Context also matters in both data and design. Who is asking the question? Who is included in the data set? Who is visualizing the data? All have impact. A trans researcher asking me about my choices in transitioning is radically different than a cis person asking the same question. Who we ask and how we ask them is also important. The city of New York wanted to look at ways communities deal with inaccessible housing. They surveyed people in the shelter system, those who are unhoused, and various other forms of housing arrangements. They concluded that there was no problem with unstable housing in the Asian-dominant neighborhoods. Great, right? They hadn't translated their survey into any Asian languages. Nor did the researchers know about the specific ways that especially Chinese communities deal with the temporary and unstable housing. Of course you won't find a problem in Asian communities if you don't go to where the people are and ask them in their languages. Context also demands that sometimes it's important to use certain labels even if they grate our sensibilities today. A good example is census data. While we would never design a survey asking about colored people today, we must use that language when the context demands it. But how you label it, the explanatory text around it, the design choices you make are all critical to driving the message in the right direction. Let's go back to that list you made about yourself. I can just about guarantee there is something on there that is outside of the mainstream set of options. Maybe you've never seen a choice for career that matches yours, or your family structure is never listed in datasets, or your spiders are never counted among the puppies and bunnies of family pet data. How are you not being seen? What would you like others to consider when they design their datasets, when they choose their labels? Dataviz has been used for advocacy since its earliest days. Florence Nightingale had a purpose to her charts to make sure her soldiers were seen. Some of our vizzes are clearly in the world of advocacy and pushing for change, but some of you may feel like that isn't what you're doing. But you are. How you reflect your data, whether it's hospital cleanliness or financial data from last quarter, you are shaping the conversation. The choices you make matter. Does your billable hours data obscure those on parental leave? Are the on-time stats of a transit system impacted by economic infrastructure factors that you aren't making visible? I work at a big law firm in New York City. As with many companies right now, we're looking at our diversity, and reporting is a big part of knowing where we were, where we are now, and where we should go from here. I got the test data with a rough sketch of the visualizations they wanted, with labels that had been used in the past. It wasn't great, and I wasn't going to perpetuate suboptimal labels. Our data comes from the HR paperwork that people fill out when they're hired and is updated annually. The choices for gender on the paperwork are male, female, and not declared. First, I changed the labels to men and women. Male and female have certain connotations that aren't appropriate when talking about our employees. We never discussed that change, but now almost everyone uses those words naturally. But what about that not declared option? I knew it existed because it's what I checked when I was hired. There wasn't anyone who had chosen that in the test dataset, though, and it wasn't in the sample vizzes. How would another designer have even known it was an option? I made the decision to add dummy data to my initial dataset so the option would show up. By doing so, I made sure it was accounted for in every chart. From a design standpoint, that matters because I know I've allowed space for that option and given it appropriate colors, etc. But it is the human aspect that matters more. I literally made space for people. Every time someone looks at this dashboard, they will see a space for those who don't choose man or woman for whatever reason. With that small decision, I'm planting in everyone's head that those people are welcome here and are part of the conversation. They are seen. As the iterations went on, several charts were hard to design when that category was included. But now, instead of glossing over it and suggesting we leave it off until we need it, each member of the team insists on changing the viz or the scale or the placement or the explanatory text to include them. That wasn't happening when we started 6 months ago. The label choice has directly impacted the dashboard and the conversations as people look at it, but I'm proud to say that the impact goes even further. HR is changing their paperwork to include more choices. That label choice, that design decision reverberated to high-level conversations saying, wait, what does not declared mean? Does that adequately represent everyone? It doesn't, so we changed it. We'll now have 7 categories: woman, trans woman, man, trans man, non-binary or third gender, identify with an identity not listed, and prefer not to disclose. These aren't perfect. They aren't absolutely every option, but they are a substantial step forward. More people will know when they start at the firm that they are seen, their colleagues are seen, that this is who we are and people don't need to hide or force themselves into the tiny little box that doesn't fit them. Adding more choices, adding free text fields, these things make it harder for us. It's harder to design, to aggregate. But labels are a model of understanding. They're a model for how we understand the world we're representing and how we want that world to look in the future. Think back to your list. The words you chose are how you understand yourself. They should be how others understand you too. These models of understanding aren't static either. Terminology changes, sometimes rapidly. An important question to ask is, how will this be perceived in the future? Have you done the best you can with what you have now? Our list of gender options isn't comprehensive. It'll likely change and evolve. That's okay. We're doing the best we can with what we have now, and we're continuing the conversation. Our own identities aren't static either. Someone who is blind may have previously been sighted. Someone who knows 5 languages now may have grown up only knowing 1. Someone living well above the median in relative luxury may have used social nets, such as unemployment or food assistance in the past. And similarly, someone on unemployment may have lived in relative luxury in the past, potentially in the quite recent past. Does your data and design account for these changing identities? I want to come back to the idea of those categories we choose for ourselves versus those we have little or no control over. Some of these are obvious. I'm as tall as I am, and that isn't likely to change, though it could, particularly if I started using a wheelchair. Some are obvious on the other side, our hobbies, for instance. But there's a huge gray area. Did I choose my gender or even my gender presentation? What about religion? A friend was raised Unitarian Universalist, a category rarely listed as an option, by the way. As she grew into adulthood, she still belongs and wants to be part of that community. Did she choose? Was it chosen for her? In my survey, the most commonly added category was political affiliation. People seem to feel deeply that this needed to be included. It is a fundamental part of who they are. Does it matter that we choose our political affiliation? Is it important that many people reported that their politics differ from how they were raised? Maybe this idea of chosen identities doesn't matter to your work, but maybe it does. It is part of those invisible decisions that you need to make visible. These are the types of questions to ask, to not take as given or settled or obvious. What does all of this mean for you, and what can you do with it? First, bake into your design process the concept that you need to make sure everyone is seen. That is your responsibility as a designer. If your financial data obscures the impact of people on parental leave, call that out. If your market research on family pets doesn't include spiders, add it. Be curious about the lack of unstable housing situations in Chinatown. Don't be afraid to question those who designed the data, or collected it, or are providing it to you, or yourself. Second, understand that you are not going to know every category or every possible response to a category. If you ask people about their sexuality and don't include sapiosexual because you didn't know it existed, what should those people fill in? That's being attracted to intelligence, by the way. It's okay to not know all the options, but it isn't okay to not do your best to find out. It isn't okay to not make space for everyone, to find out the options and make the box bigger. Over and over, ask this. What does my client not know that I don't know that we need to know? Digging into this is going to look different for everyone, so it's tough to say, here's a list of resources to refer to. A quick internet search can help you find some things like Codeless for testing for colorblindness, or how to design for screen reader compatibility. Sometimes you need to talk to the community you're studying. Don't be afraid of free text fields. Just like you did at the beginning, and the respondents did in my survey, people will tell you about themselves if you let them. The most important thing is to ask, and keep asking, and come from as many angles as you can think of, and ask others what angles they know about. And when you find a new angle, or term, or category that you didn't know about before, don't get upset or frustrated, just build it in, and build better. Third, question every design decision, especially the invisible ones. Why are you using those colors? Why did you place that text here instead of there? Are you making assumptions or using outdated language? Have you designed your charts for the not declareds of your data set? Can everyone access your visualization? Don't dismiss edge cases. Don't assume that designing for 80% or even 90% of your population is good enough. Your data and your visualizations get better as you broaden your view. It can be hard and frustrating, easy to give up and take the path others have carved, the pink for girls, or red and blue for political parties, but keep questioning. Remember that a ramp for wheelchair users helps people with baby strollers. You may not know how important your inclusion efforts are, but they will have an impact. And finally, you may think that you are too low or removed to influence the big decision makers, but you aren't. You are making choices. You are shaping the conversation. You are influential in how everyone views the data. Take that responsibility seriously. Speak for those who can't. Engage in the discussions. Labels matter. Being seen matters. Your choices matter. Use that to the advantage of all of us. Thank you.